also saying
because they were like showing this video of them making it, and then he was like, and then Daniel was like, "What can you have this game?" He was like, "Yo, this kid was like."
and they make that song. What's that song called? Oh yeah, help me out. You. They were singing. Wait, Logan wasn't singing.
She's like, "Girl, what you trying to do?"
And they did some concerts too.
And that time, apocalypse. He said apocalypse. And then he was like, because they were making like, which member of the band was called Zombie Apocalypse? And then Jordan was like saying school kids. And he was like, wow, that's so weird. And then he like kind of saying it, and then everybody else was like, apocalypse. And he was like, okay, which member of the band will survive the zombie apocalypse?
Apocalypse. Wait, who said that? Jack says Acopolis?
No, Jack said, and then Jack was like, no, because he said it again. And then he was like, which one was there? Was that a zombie apocalypse?
Zombie?
Exactly, he was like, a zombie.
A zombie.
And then, Jack, right, he has a name, his three cities, right? I mean, countries, right? And he said one.
City or country?
Country.
London is a state? Yeah.
No, wait, London City, England is.
Mạo Vinh
And he said, my wing or something.
Adidas Adidas
I don't know.
Mạo Vinh said Adidas
A Di Đà Phật.
Zach said that?
And you're like, wow.
Why are you like
Nãy giờ chưa?
They're just white open. Why are you like working?
3 phút.
I think it was Daniel behind the camera because you can't see who's holding the camera, but I think it's Daniel, right? And he was holding his water bottle. And Carter looked across the room and he was
Wait, what was that video where you showed me when they were eating food? What was that?
Because then Daniel and Zach had to try it. And then, and then they put the black one and then he was like, I'm not gonna like people who don't. And he was like, you like the fish.
Because he said that to the girl. Zach is such a good camera. Zach was standing behind. Zach kept standing behind Jack. How?
Zach is like a John.
How?
He's like a man. Oh yeah. This is Bob.
Didn't you say that book before? Oh yeah, remember he said to Danny, he said that you were that was him? They almost broke his cup. zero people. Yay.
How do you see how many people are watching?
No one.
No, but how do you see if someone's watching?
It says next to live. One player, 2 players.
What are you doing? Why are you changing? Wake back up. Wake back up. Why do you look so serious? What did you say? Why'd you move it? Yeah, he's just so serious. He's like, why'd you move it? Put it back up. Why'd you move it? Put it. If you care so much, you put it. You're not gonna see it. And it's gonna say it's you. I told him move the camera. Cammy, I'm gonna get back.
Ready? Okay. Welcome back to another exciting edition of Sunday Lectures. Alright. I'm just going to recap because it's been almost like a month since we last spoke about like what in the world we are even talking about, right? What I've been talking about for the last month, at least, was something called the Eightfold Path, right? And so the question is, like, what in the world is the Eightfold Path? Why is it even important to even talk about the Eightfold Path? Think about it. What's like the basic fundamental premise of Buddhism, right? It's this idea that we live in this state of suffering to begin with. And where does this state of suffering come from, right? And this is part of the Four Noble Truths, right? Noble truth number 1, we do live in a state of suffering. How? Where does it like manifest or like show itself up? Well, it's through a couple of things. Hatred, ignorance, greed, attachments. If you think about, and it's a very deep concept, right? But if you think about it, if you have any of those 4 things, it's going to ultimately cause you to be, to some extent, unhappy if you really have those deep inside you. And not just to the extent of being unhappy, but ultimately like live like a life of suffering. So that's like the first of the Four Noble Truths, right? Like we live in this state of suffering. But the second noble truth is that there's actually a way out. Like suffering doesn't have to be present forever, right? Even though this is our natural state, there is a way out. That's the second noble truth. Or like it can stop, right? The next noble truth is that there is a middle path that you guys can take to actually achieve the cessation. Cessation means the stopping of this, and that's nirvana. And that's our ultimate goal, right? You guys want to get to the end of suffering. If the answer is yes, then you follow the Eightfold Path. The question is, what is the Eightfold Path? And that's what the entire thing that we've been speaking about for the past month before, right? It's everything that you have to do right. It's like how you should live your life that leads you down this path to end suffering, okay? So that's ultimately the big goal. Like, do you want to end suffering or not? And if you choose to do so, just follow the Eightfold Path. Now, in the past, we talked about 3 different things. We talked about the right view, the right thinking, and the right speech, right? Just to recap very quickly, the right view. Like, all this is part of your mind anyway, right? The right view, the right speech, and the right thinking, it's all part of your mind. It's like, figure out for yourself what's right, what's wrong. Understand, like, to some extent, I don't know how deeply, the Four Noble Truths, like what the Buddha is talking about, like our state of being. And learn to like cultivate gratitude, not entitlement, learn not to make assumptions, learn not to lie, etc., etc. These are like part of the right view. And then the right speech is like, again, don't lie, but also the opposite end of having a right speech is learn to listen deeply, okay? So that's all that is for the right view, thinking, and speech. today we're talking about the right action. Right action refers to, well, what are you doing? You have everything that's right in your brain. What are you doing with your actual body, right? It refers to, doing the right action refers to just trying to promote, like, love, trying to prevent harm. That's ultimately what the right action is all about, right? It's the practice of non-violence towards yourself and other people. You have to become, basically, ultimately, right action is basically this. You have to be aware that, like, you yourself, this body, you have this potential to cause suffering and destruction of other life, right? So you guys have to make this choice with your body to actually not create any harm for you or other people around you, okay? So it's really about like cultivating compassion and learning to protect people, plants, animals, and resources, right? And the other idea is that it's referring to like generosity, as in like being aware of social injustice, exploitation, and suffering, and then being committed, using your time, your energy, your body to help like fight against those causes as well. Okay. Let's see. The idea of right action, it's basically you committing to cultivating good health, physical and mental. And okay, let's put it in this way, right? If you are thinking deeply and consciously about like committing the right action, a lot of what you do and your choices that you are making is it's always towards preventing harm from being done. Now, you might think, wait a minute, I don't kill anybody, right? Like, I'm always doing the right thing. So, what do I have to be mindful of with regards to right action? Well, here's an example of something that's a right action that you could think about when it comes to like protecting even life. Because as you may or may not know now, right, the environment is suffering tremendously, right? It's due to us as humans. Every time, for example, we go out and we buy something, we're creating waste, right? And it's interesting because there's a movement going on right now with regards to whether to give you guys straws or not, right? Think about this. Because apparently there was some article that came out about how there were like hundreds of thousands of like straws, just plastic straws, that are just floating in the ocean. Why? Because we have this need to actually put a long plastic tube into something so that we can drink. Now, one person drinking from a straw doesn't actually do anything, right? But if millions and millions of people are actually making the choice, hey, every time I go buy something like coffee or a drink or something, I'm going to ask for a plastic straw, that's creating more and more pollution that's harming our planet, right? So think about this. How can you make a conscious choice to take like an action that's actually going to mitigate or lessen the harm that's being done? Not just, right now, no harm is being done to anybody, except for the planet, right? And when the planet is being harmed, you see like natural disasters, like crazy climate change, etc., etc. So the idea is this. If one person, and I actually noticed this, and I'm like, I question whether it was making a difference or not, but it does. If you guys all start to adapt this mindset. Like next time you guys go to a restaurant or something, or like let's just say you order from fast food, and you have the option to take a straw or not, choose not to take a straw. Why? Well, because it's one less straw that's being thrown out, right? And just because you're doing it and somebody else is not doing it, and they're taking like 5 different straws, that's not the point. The point is that you are making a choice. You're taking a right action that's helping the environment ultimately, right? And ultimately, like, that's just one way you can actually practice right action. If you ever have a chance, let's just say, to volunteer your time to do something, right? Like whether you work at, even at this temple, or you work at a soup kitchen or whatever, that's something called considered the right action, because you're actually promoting like a practice of like spreading like love and compassion, and at the same time, like it's like not violent, right? So the idea of right action is this: ultimately, you have this body, and this body can do multiple things, right? Whether for good or for bad. What do you choose to do? For example, even like harmlessly taking something that isn't yours. That's, in other words, called stealing, right? But sometimes you like walk down the street and you see something and it's like, ooh, I want this, I'll just take this, nobody's there. But you never know. You never know if somebody just like left it there accidentally and they meant to come back for it or something like that. Ultimately, what you do with your body, right? It's got to be the right thing to do. And you yourself, you have to understand, like, what is the right thing, ultimately. That leads me to the second half of this. Actually, I want to harp in on the straw thing very quickly. There's something in political science. It's a common term. It's called tragedy of the commons, and it's something that's like worth noting. It's like, why do we have things that are harmful to society, and like why are people not like taking the right action to fix it, right? And this is something that like the more you think about, like the more you can impact. But let me very quickly explain to you what the tragedy of the commons is, and then you guys can think about like how and, well, let me explain first. Tragedy of the commons is this scenario. It's a very interesting scenario, right? Imagine there's like, let's just say 10 farmers with their cows, right? 10 farmers with their cows. And you have this like patch of grass in the center, right? Now, the patch is for everybody to use. That's basically like a metaphor for this earth, right? And the farmers are the people. The patch is for everybody to use. Now, the thing is this: if the farmers actually take turns grazing, which is like allowing the cows to feed in the patch of the farm, and we take turn doing so in an orderly manner, the grass won't necessarily, it'll have time to replenish itself, basically. But what ends up happening, and this is the real tragedy part, is that, let's just say, there's nobody regulating this. Very much like there's nobody that's the policeman of the world, right? They don't regulate like how people are like destroying rainforests, or they don't regulate how people are like overfishing and stuff like that. So basically what happens is, one day, one farmer decides, I'm gonna send all my cows and I'm gonna have them eat like a big chunk of the land. And then farmer number one did that, so farmer number two was like, wait a minute, I want all my cows to be fed as well. So let me send all my cows there. And then farmer three sees farmers 1 and 2 do that, and so they're gonna send their cows, and then et cetera, right? What ends up happening when everybody starts sending their cows? They become really deeply selfish and self-interested. They just want their cows to be fed. Basically, what happens? What happens to the green patch of land that used to be there? Now it's being overrun by all these cows and everybody's self-interested, right? They got what they wanted, ultimately, but when you zoom out, now there's actually no more patch of land with resources to begin with. So this idea of the tragedy of the commons is that like people become self-interested. And the second you become self-interested, you start taking the wrong action, or the type of action that only benefits you and not the greater common good or the greater society. So think carefully about that. Every time you make an action, whether it's like harming anything directly or not, think back. Is it harming the greater society? Because for every, like the idea of karma is that like for every effect, like there's always cause and effect, right? So and I mean, this is like probably the reason why like we have like climate change to begin with, right? And so this is the idea, like a lot of people, a lot of businesses, they don't live by this idea of right action to begin with. All they want to do is make profit for themselves, etc., etc. That's why we have arrived at this point right now. So this is like there's like a larger macro scale, like what's happening in society, and then there's like the smaller thing, like what can you do, right, for this? Okay, so that's right action. That's everything that you're doing with your body. The second thing I'm going to talk about is right diligence or right effort. And so keep in mind, this idea of like the right things to do, and I'm putting this in quotation, it's all part of the Eightfold Path, right? And ultimately the goal is that if you follow down this path of doing the right things with your mind, your speech, your thinking, and then your body with the right action and the right diligence, you're ultimately going to find liberation and joy, okay? So the fifth part of the Eightfold Path is called right diligence. And right diligence is basically effort. Effort in the things that you are doing. Now, here's the issue. Let's just say you're very diligent in getting possessions. Like you're diligent in getting profit. You're diligent in getting food. You're diligent in getting fame. That's not considered ultimately the right effort though, right? It's just the appearance of diligence. Practicing something hard doesn't mean that you're practicing it right. And so the right effort means you have to, there's a way to practice right effort. And there's like 4 things that that they're talking about in terms of the right diligence, right? I'm gonna list the 4 things for you to think about real quick, okay? It's almost redundant, but like, you have to be diligent and you have to put effort in these 4 things. Number 1, preventing unwholesome seeds to arise. And I'll explain what these unwholesome seeds mean. 2, helping those unwholesome seeds within you go back down. 3, finding ways to water or like to help flourish like wholesome seeds within you. And then finally, nourishing seeds that are already wholesome to be in your consciousness. Okay, what in the world is this talking about? What is this list talking about? Okay, within you, within your brains, within your consciousness, you have good and bad, right? Where there's the ability to be as honest and truthful as possible, you also have the ability to lie, right? So the ability to be as generous as possible, you also have the ability to be greedy. The idea of right diligence and right effort is this. Are you constantly putting effort to actually prevent things like greed, hatred, ignorance, and the wrong views from surfacing? And are you constantly also trying to cultivate happiness, joy, love, loyalty, etc. within you, right? This is the idea of right diligence. And sometimes, like, if you, and this kind of lecture is a little bit off, but if you, at the beginning I said, if you like look like you're working hard, does that mean that you're working correctly or you're working right? Because if you're working for fame and profit, are you benefiting others, right? And is that considered ultimately right diligence to begin with, or right effort? Yeah, and there's a story behind this where it's like there used to be this monk in the Tang dynasty who sat for hours, day and night, trying to meditate. And one day, his teacher comes along and he's like, "Why are you sitting so hard?" And the monk says, "Because I want to become the Buddha, or a Buddha." And the teacher says, "Oh, that's interesting, okay." And then the teacher picks up a stone and starts polishing the stone, right? And then the monk's like, and polishing really hard. And the monk's like, "Why are you polishing that stone so hard?" And the teacher's like, "Because I want to make a mirror out of this stone." But then the monk who was meditating so hard said, "Wait a minute, no matter how hard you brush this stone, you really can't make it into a mirror. And so the teacher's like, exactly, that's the same thing. It's like, no matter how hard you sit in meditating, you really can't become the Buddha, like in just that way, right? So that's illustrating this idea that sometimes the perception of right diligence isn't the right diligence or effort at all, okay? Okay, so, everything that I was talking about before, the 4 things that you have to do, like with regards to like preventing unwholesome seeds and then cultivating the wholesome seeds, those are like the things that like is involved in this idea of like putting the right effort. It's interesting because it also mentions that like the right effort means not using force whatsoever. Because if you're putting in too much force and you're missing something like joy and ease, you're not actually putting in joy, ease, and interest. You're not actually putting in the right effort. So, and this is the connection to the monk who was like meditating so hard, right? It shouldn't have to be hard. When the monk here in this temple, he rings the bell for like meditation. Like every Sunday, there's meditation at like 12:30 or something. There's like this meditation session, right? Your energy to decide to participate or not, okay, to some extent, some people think meditation is really hard, and to some people they really like it. The question is, what's the difference? Both people are sitting there, right, for the same amount of time. So why is, for one person, the diligence level, the diligence is actually the same for the body. But why is it that for some people it's so easy and some people it's so hard, right? It's ultimately determined by how much joy you find in it and how much interest you find in it, right? And what it brings. And so, if you don't find joy or interest in it, it's going to be so painful, right? And that's ultimately this idea of this entire conversation about like walking down the Eightfold Path. It shouldn't be a burden. Like doing all the things that it's being asked of you, like figuring out like what are the right things to cultivate within you, or what are the wrong things to like not cultivate or to not water. It shouldn't be a burden. You should find like joy / interest / ease in doing so. And for example, for just like people, let's just say homework, essays, learning, lectures, or even your jobs, right? For some people, it's like such a burden on Monday morning for them to get up, right? And why is that such the case? It's because they don't find joy or interest in it, right? The second you make a decision, this is going to bring joy into my life. I'm here, I'm present because I'm interested. The time's going to fly by really quickly. But when it's not so much so, then it's going to be extremely difficult, right? Think about this. Think about if you had to become a monk yourselves. If you had to become a monk yourself, how hard would it be? Think about this. You would have to sit in meditation for hours. You had to read a lot of sutras. You would have to do a lot of chanting. You had to do Sunday services, etc., right? But in the book that I'm reading, the guy chose to become a monk, and he says, this is the most joyful thing that I found. Every time I listen to sutras, every time I sit in meditation, I find so much joy in it. And so, things that require you to be diligent do not require a lot of effort. And it doesn't require a lot of effort the second that you choose to see it as a joyful activity. The second that you find a lot of interest in it, it becomes very little effort, okay? So, I'm gonna have to find a way to like wrap this up together next week because the difference between like talking about right action and right diligence, I need to figure out like what it is. But like I'm trying to like cultivate this in my own brains, okay? But that is my lecture for today. Thank you. And then I'll be back next week to talk about right concentration and right meditation as well. Okay? Thank you.